Picture the headlines from June 2025. Two Chinese researchers arrested by the FBI. The charges were heavy: smuggling a biological agent. The media coverage, particularly from networks like CNN, was immediate and breathless. They used terms like potential agroterrorism and weaponized agent, painting a terrifying picture of foreign adversaries infiltrating the border with a payload designed to cripple the American food supply. It had all the tension of a spy thriller, a secret plot, a lethal package, and a swift intervention by national security forces. But then you look at the weapon itself, and the entire narrative collapses into absurdity. The biological agent in question was Fusarium greminarum. That might sound like a scary scientific name, but if you drive through Kansas or Minnesota during harvest season, you are literally breathing it in. It is a fungus that is already in the soil of almost every wheat field in North America. The contrast here is genuinely staggering. On one side, you have a media cycle treating this like a scene from Contagion, implying a catastrophic threat to national safety. On the other side, you have a pathogen so common that accusing someone of smuggling it into the U.S. is legally equivalent to arresting someone for smuggling sand into the Sahara Desert. That massive disconnect between the terrifying bioterror narrative sold to the public and the mundane scientific reality of a common field mold forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Are we actually looking at a security threat, or are we watching a paperwork error get weaponized because of the researcher's ethnicity?
That analogy, smuggling sand into the Sahara, is it's exactly what makes this case so illustrative of our current geopolitical climate.
Right.
We are diving into a situation where a completely commonplace agricultural problem has somehow been inflated into, well, an act of war.
Yeah. And this substance at the heart of it all, Fusarium greminarum. This isn't some secret weapon cooked up in a lab.
Not at all. It's a globally recognized cereal crop pathogen. It's been studied for decades.
But it's not just that it damages the crops, right? There's another layer here that makes it dangerous. It introduces something actually toxic into the food chain.
That's the critical detail. And it's the detail that often gets lost in those breathless headlines you mentioned. This fungus is the cause of Fusarium head blight, which is, it's economically devastating.
We're talking huge amounts of money.
Hundreds of millions of dollars every single year for U.S. farmers. Think Ohio, Nebraska, the Dakotas, their wheat crops get ruined. But, and this is the key part, when the fungus grows on grains like wheat or barley, it produces these powerful mycotoxins.
Mycotoxins.
Specifically, one called deoxynivalenol, or DON for short.
And DON is what makes this a food safety issue, not just, a problem for farmers.
Precisely. If the concentration of DON gets too high, it's genuinely harmful to humans and to livestock.
Yeah.
It can cause illness, reproductive issues, and huge economic losses when entire shipments of grain have to be rejected.
So there are regulations.
Oh, absolutely. International and domestic food safety authorities regulate DON levels very, very closely. So, far from being some secret biological agent to be smuggled in, Fusarium is one of the most intensely studied organisms in all of global plant pathology.
Because we desperately need to figure out how to stop it.
We need to stop it from poisoning our food supply. Which, brings us right back to the sheer absurdity of the situation. These researchers, their entire job is to figure out how to defeat this fungus.
And yet, they're the ones the FBI charged with smuggling it in.
And we have to be really clear here. Studying Fusarium is completely standard practice. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does it. Every major land-grant university does it.
All the big agricultural research centers around the world.
They all study this exact organism. They even exchange samples internationally all the time to compare different strains, to figure out genetic resistance in plants, to develop new treatments.
Because the fungus it's just everywhere.
It's endemic. Its spores are in the air during harvest. So to take this common research material and then frame it as smuggling a biological agent just because the researchers are foreign, it strongly suggests the actual offense was something else.
A bureaucratic error.
A permit omission, maybe a paperwork violation, something minor that was then deliberately inflated. It had to be inflated to fit a pre-existing, and I think we can say politically expedient, narrative, a narrative that was driven entirely by the researcher's nationality.
So if we go with that premise that a paperwork error was weaponized, we really have to look at the political landscape that made that even possible. And that brings us right to the China initiative.
Absolutely. These arrests didn't just happen in a vacuum.
No. They're seen as part of a much larger trend.
A direct extension, really, of the momentum that started with the Trump-era China initiative. It was formally launched by the DOJ back in November 2018. And on paper, The stated mission seems legitimate.
Countering Chinese economic espionage, theft of intellectual property. I mean, that sounds reasonable.
It does. But the sources we have suggest the initiative pretty quickly broadened its scope. Maybe. Yeah. Dangerously so.
Yeah, that's the critical point, isn't it? The critics argue, and I think a lot of the subsequent events bear this out, that it really deviated from that initial mission.
It did. It moved away from concrete espionage or IP theft. And instead, the net just got wider and wider until it started catching what prosecutors called research integrity issues.
Research integrity, that sounds so vague. What does that actually mean?
We're talking about things like failing to disclose a foreign affiliation on a grant application, or not reporting income you received from a foreign university when you're applying for funding from, say, the NIH or NASA.
Okay, so those are definitely violations, I get that. But to classify not ticking a box on a form as espionage, that feels like a massive leap.
It's a profound institutional and legal leap. These are administrative violations. They're things that are normally handled by a university's internal review board.
Right.
And suddenly they were being treated as grounds for a federal felony prosecution under espionage laws. And this shift, it primarily targeted researchers of Chinese or Asian descent.
So it created the perfect legal tool to inflate these minor things into huge national security threats.
Exactly. And the Fusarium arrests fit that mold perfectly. You take a low-level, technically regulated item, and you treat its movement across a border as if it's high treason.
I think the biggest test of this entire legal framework came with that really high-profile acquittal of Dr. Anming Hu. That case, it feels like a huge precedent. It's a serious indictment of the whole initiative's methods.
The case of Dr. Anming Hu, a nanotechnology expert at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Yeah, that is the foundational legal challenge to this entire trend.
And he was accused of what, exactly?
He was accused of concealing his ties to a Chinese university while he was getting research funding from NASA. And NASA has a rule that prohibits its funding recipients from collaborating with China. The Department of Justice went after him hard. They painted him as a spy.
But the trial didn't go their way.
It was a complete disaster for the prosecution. The first trial ended with a hung jury, and then a federal judge just acquitted him outright.
Yeah.
And the judge's ruling was stunning.
Why? What was the reasoning?
Because the judge determined that the U.S. government had failed to prove the most central element of the charge, that Dr. Hu acted with the intent to defraud NASA. He might have made a mistake on a form, sure, but he wasn't trying to steal technology. He wasn't trying to deceive the government for some malicious purpose.
And the judge didn't just stop at the question of intent, did they? They went even further and questioned the government's whole interpretation of the rule itself.
They absolutely did. The judge specifically noted that the government's interpretation of NASA's funding restriction was, and I'm quoting here, expansive and unproven.
Wow.
In other words, the rule was so vaguely worded that prosecutors could basically use it to criminalize routine, normal international academic collaboration. That judgment just cast a huge shadow of doubt on the legitimacy of dozens of other prosecutions that were being pursued under the same logic.
And then there was that one detail that came out in the trial that it completely undermines the entire moral authority of the China initiative.
It really does. During the proceedings, an FBI agent admitted under oath that he had used false information. He'd used a misleading or maybe even a fabricated email to justify getting surveillance warrants.
But so they were spying on him based on a lie.
A team of agents spied on Dr. Hu and even on his son for 2 years. And it was based on information that the agency itself later admitted was manipulated. That revelation was. It was an earthquake in the academic community.
I can imagine.
It basically confirmed that this prosecutorial zeal wasn't just based on these questionable legal interpretations. It was also based on aggressive, sometimes fabricated police work to build cases against these researchers who were, predominantly of Asian descent.
So with that level of misconduct and the acquittal, it's no wonder the academic world reacted so strongly.
The condemnation was immense. The consensus among the leading research institutions was that the China initiative was doing far, far more harm than good.
Not to Chinese espionage, but to American science itself.
Exactly. We saw 177 Stanford faculty members sign a letter formally urging the DOJ to just cease the operations of the initiative.
And their argument was powerful.
It was. They said it fuels racial biases, it harms academic freedom, and ultimately it damages America's own technological competitiveness by scaring away international talent. Even members of the U.S. Congress started demanding investigations into what they called the repeated wrongful targeting of individuals of Asian descent for alleged espionage.
So that climate of suspicion was already firmly in place long before the Fusarium arrests even happened.
It was the foundation for it.
And this political environment, this chilling effect,
Uh-huh.
it didn't just stay in courtrooms or in academic petitions. It went straight into the working labs of the United States. And the result was a literal, measurable loss of scientific progress.
We have a specific story about this, right? About a breakthrough that just got shelved.
Yeah, this story really shows the real non-monetary cost of this climate, of suspicion on something as vital as agricultural science.
So where does it take us?
It takes us back to the Midwest. A plant pathology lab focused entirely on solving this exact problem, Fusarium head blight. And the lead postdoctoral researcher, we can call him Wei, he was a star. He and a senior American professor, they were on the verge of a genuine breakthrough.
What were they working on?
They were close to identifying a specific gene that could give wheat immunity to the fungus. A breakthrough like that, if it was commercialized, would instantly save American farmers hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It would eliminate the dawn contamination, the crop loss.
It would be an absolute game changer for global food security. A massive win. But then the news broke about those other 2 Chinese researchers being arrested.
For just possessing common Fusarium samples.
Right. And the atmosphere in Wei's lab just became unbearable.
Yeah.
You have to understand, Wei himself had legally imported strains of this fungus for his comparative genetic studies. It was a standard, necessary part of his research.
But suddenly that standard practice looked dangerous.
He realized the threat wasn't based on what was legal anymore. It was based on his background. The fear wasn't just about being arrested. It was this deeper realization that in this charged political climate, wrong was being redefined by nationality rather than by law.
So, faced with that, with the possibility that his essential research could be used against him, what did he do?
He quietly made the decision to go back to China. He cleared out his lab bench, he left that breakthrough project incomplete, and all that crucial genetic data unfinished.
That's a staggering loss.
The cost is staggering, and it's not an espionage loss for the U.S. It's a loss borne by U.S. agriculture, by the farmers in Kansas and Minnesota who are now left waiting indefinitely for a solution to this problem that was literally within reach.
So the politicization of science actively undermined the very work needed to solve a shared global problem.
We lost the knowledge needed to fight a common fungus because we, in effect, criminalized the fight itself.
That is just, it's a devastating loss. And it raises a really critical question. If this chilling effect is driving away top talent and shelving breakthroughs, is there any way to actually quantify the overall damage? I mean, we have this powerful anecdote, but how do we measure the systemic damage?
We can measure it,
Yeah.
and we can, thanks to some very detailed economic research that came out of the London School of Economics, the LSE.
What did they do?
They basically used the implementation of the China Initiative in late 2018 as a specific external shock event. You know, like dropping a rock into a pond to see the ripples. They used the huge Scopus database to track productivity and collaboration trends among Chinese researchers.
Okay, but how do you isolate the effect of just the U.S. policy? How do you separate that from, general academic trends or changes in Chinese funding or something else?
Their methodology was really clever, really meticulous. They created 2 distinct groups to compare. The treatment group was Chinese researchers who were highly dependent on U.S. collaborations before 2018. They were the ones who would be hit hardest by the policy shock.
Okay.
Then they compared them to a control group, and that group was made up of Chinese researchers who were highly dependent on European collaborations. So that allowed them to measure changes that were specifically because of the U.S. policy shift, not just some general global academic trend.
So what did the data show? What happened to collaborations right after 2018?
The decline was stark. It was immediate. The share of U.S. partnerships with Chinese authors just dropped noticeably right after 2018. But the crucial part is the comparison.
With the European group.
Exactly. The European partnerships in the control group, they just kept on rising. Steadily, monotonically, just like they had been since 2005, with no trend break at all.
Wow. So that's pretty compelling visual evidence that something specific happened with the U.S. pipeline.
A significant, deliberate shift away from U.S. collaboration.
Did the policy just sever all existing relationships, or was the impact more selective?
It was selective, but in a way that was really effective at stifling growth. The policy primarily hit the ability of these Chinese researchers to publish with new and short-term U.S. co-authors.
So it was harder to start a new project.
Much harder. They estimated about a 7% drop in the probability of that happening. What's interesting is that researchers were more likely to keep their existing long-term U.S. collaborations going.
I guess that reflects a deep personal trust built up over years that the political climate couldn't just break overnight.
That's probably right. But what it means is that the U.S. effectively lost the chance to foster the next generation of joint research.
Okay, let's move beyond just the number of collaborations and look at the quality of the science, because that's what really matters for progress. Did this decline affect the impact of the research that was still being published?
Yes, and this is where the findings become really alarming. The China Initiative created what the researchers called a strongly negative and significant trend break in the quality of the publications for those treated Chinese researchers.
The ones who lost the most U.S. collaboration.
Right.
So how do you quantify research quality in a study like this?
The most direct way is citations. How many other scientists are citing your work? And the treated authors, they experienced a 13% greater drop in their yearly citations compared to the control group collaborating with Europe.
Okay, 13% is significant, but you mentioned there was more to it than that.
Yeah, this is the really incredible part. The LSE researchers went a step further. They found that the total negative effect on citations was estimated to be 3.4 times larger than the direct drop you'd expect just from losing the U.S. co-author's name on the paper.
Whoa, 3.4 times larger. Wait, what does that imply? It means it's not just about losing one person.
It's not just another name on a paper. It implies that the U.S. collaboration provided some kind of leverage or access to critical resources that the Chinese researchers just couldn't easily replicate or replace.
What kind of resources?
Think about it. That U.S. collaborator might have provided access to unique cutting-edge equipment or high-impact research platforms, or even just critical editorial visibility within those top-tier journals. They were part of a high-status network.
So losing the U.S. connection meant losing more than just one collaborator.
It meant losing the entire boost in visibility that the U.S. network gave to that paper's ultimate impact. That 3.4x multiplier, that shows you the depth of the integration and the true value of that American scientific connection.
So the quality metric dropped so severely because that American network just wasn't easily replaceable.
Exactly. And they saw a corresponding negative trend break in the number of publications showing up in the top 5% most cited journals.
Yeah.
It gets worse. The quality of their other co-authors also declined. They measured that using the H-index.
Can you just quickly explain the H-index for us? Why does that matter?
Sure. The H-index measures both the productivity and the citation impact of a scientist. So if you have an H-index of, say, 20, it means you've published 20 papers that have each been cited at least 20 times. It's a measure of influence.
Okay.
So when the average H-index of a Chinese researcher's co-authors goes down, it's a signal. It means they're no longer partnering with the highest achieving scientists in the world. It confirms that they couldn't just swap out a top U.S. partner for a non-U.S. partner of equal standing. That U.S. science network was unique.
And was this negative effect spread evenly across all fields, or did it target specific high-value areas?
It was highly concentrated. The negative impact was strongest for the Chinese researchers, who were already the highest performers, the ones with the most citations before the shock.
So the policy hit the very top tier of collaborating Chinese researchers the hardest.
Yes. It undermined the collaborations that were likely driving the most foundational and cutting-edge work. And it was strongest in fields where the U.S. traditionally dominates, like physics, chemistry, and life sciences.
Which, of course, includes plant pathology and the work on Fusarium.
Exactly.
And it seems like the very nature of the research itself started to shift, too, moving away from that foundational basic science.
That's right. The researchers found that the China Initiative negatively affected the basic versus applied nature of the research. They found a reduced probability of publishing in what are called basic research journals. They measured that with something called the CHI index.
Okay, we need to unpack that. What's the CHI index, and what does this finding tell us about the role the U.S. was playing?
The CHI index is just a tool that helps categorize journals based on whether their research is fundamental or basic versus highly focused on practical application or applied.
So basic research is the pure pursuit of knowledge.
Right. It's the foundational stuff that eventually unlocks future technologies. Applied research uses that knowledge to solve an immediate practical problem. The LSE study showed this shift away from publishing in those foundational basic science journals was directly linked to losing collaborations with U.S. co-authors.
So if the U.S. connection was key to basic research, it suggests Chinese researchers were really relying on the U.S. network for what? Intellectual freedom, resources, funding that supports that long-term work.
Precisely. They were relying on that robust U.S. ecosystem to pursue the really fundamental questions of science. And by closing those doors, the policy didn't just hurt the immediate output, it forced a shift toward more applied, short-term research. And that's less likely to lead to truly disruptive scientific breakthroughs down the line.
All right, let's look at the asymmetry here, because this is maybe the most crucial finding when you think about the policy's effectiveness from a U.S. perspective. We've established the harm to Chinese research, but what happened to the U.S. scientists who lost their Chinese collaborators?
This is the definitive finding on the policy's immediate effect. The LSE study found no significant effect of the China initiative on the total volume or the quality citations, top journals, anything of the research output for U.S. scientists who had prior Chinese collaborations.
That asymmetric impact it's stunning. If the U.S. didn't suffer any measurable harm, the policy effectively targeted and measurably crippled the output quality of Chinese researchers who relied on U.S. ties. So what does a nation do when its scientific bridge gets burned like that?
It accelerates its plans for total independence. I mean, the aggregate damage calculated across all Chinese research activity, it's estimated to be a 5.6% drop in total citations and a 6% drop in publications in top journals.
That is a massive, measurable hit.
It's a massive hit to Chinese scientific quality. And when you impose that kind of shock, you basically confirm the strategic necessity of developing self-sufficiency.
So the political pressure just acts as a powerful catalyst for China's existing strategic goals. This moves us to China's long game in science, especially in agricultural R&D, where the investment levels are just staggering.
They are. We have to see that this push for technological self-reliance, especially in a critical sector like food security, this is a foundational strategic imperative for China. The geopolitical tensions didn't create this plan, but they poured rocket fuel on it.
How significant is this funding on a global scale?
It completely changed the global landscape of agricultural science. China surpassed the European Union to become the largest global funder of agricultural R&D, all the way back in 2011.
2011.
Yeah.
And it's only accelerated since then.
Oh, yeah. By 2015, China was spending over $10 billion a year on agricultural R&D.
$10 billion annually, just on ag R&D.
Yes. And to put that in sharp relief, that amount was roughly twice what the U.S. spent on agricultural R&D that same year. And compared to their own spending, it's nearly a 5-fold increase since the year 2000. This is a sustained strategic commitment of monumental proportions.
What are the unique factors driving China to prioritize this? It feels like it goes beyond just normal economic competition.
It's fundamentally about survival and stability. China faces these immense, unique demographic and geographic constraints.
They have to feed, 19% of the world's population?
With less than 10% of the world's arable land. And they have limited usable water, which climate change is only making worse. On top of that, their agricultural system is fragmented. The average farm size is tiny, only about 1.6 acres.
So they have the dual pressure of too many people, too little land, all while dealing with soil pressure, disease outbreaks like Fusarium, and an aging agricultural workforce.
Exactly. So the goal isn't just incremental yield increases. It is maximizing total productivity for self-sufficiency across the entire supply chain.
Yeah.
And future-proofing their crops against climate change and global supply shocks. It's about total modernization.
And we can see this formalized in policies like the National Smart Agriculture Action Plan. What does that plan for 2024 to 2028 actually propose? It sounds like a full-scale digital overhaul.
It's maybe the most ambitious effort globally to digitalize an entire national agricultural sector. The plan signals this formal commitment to get high-tech ag research out of the laboratory and into the field at an unprecedented scale. One of its key goals is creating these centralized platforms for agricultural big data.
What does that mean in practice? How centralized are we talking?
Extremely centralized. They're building a national one-map system for all agricultural lands. And this isn't just a survey. It's a high-resolution, constantly updated national digital archive.
So they're creating a digital file for every single piece of farmland.
For every piece of cultivated land, every permanent farmland parcel, even specific breeding pits and ponds. This gives the government and researchers this immediate, granular overview of the entire national agricultural reality. It's foundational for efficient resource management.
That level of data must allow for hyper-precise, localized decisions.
It provides the bedrock for all the subsequent AI and algorithm development. The plan calls for developing their own models and algorithms with independent intellectual property rights.
Like what kind of models?
Complex simulations for crop growth, sophisticated animal behavior recognition systems, advanced production management decision-making tools. They're accelerating the application of large AI models directly into agriculture to predict outcomes, manage risks, and optimize everything.
And mechanization is a huge piece of this, obviously requiring independence from foreign tech.
Absolutely. They're boosting crop yields with digital farming solutions, enhanced plant breeding, all of it supported by digital upgrades to their agricultural machinery. A key example in the plan is the push for machinery equipped with Beidou-assisted driving systems.
Okay, we need to pause on Beidou. Why is that specific system mentioned? Why not just say GPS-assisted driving?
Because Beidou is China's domestically developed satellite navigation system. It's their alternative to the U.S.-owned GPS.
So including it in the National Action Plan underscores that commitment to self-reliance.
Completely. By mandating the use of their own satellite system for precision agriculture, things like precise sowing, variable pesticide application, automated harvesting, they ensure their entire modernization effort is reliant on independent, sovereign Chinese technology. It's insulated from any potential foreign interference or denial of service.
So it's a comprehensive 5-year plan underpinned by massive long-term funding. And we saw how the political tensions around the Fusarium case validated and accelerated this whole strategy. Let's talk about Dr. Chen and the research park in Henan.
Dr. Chen's story is the real-world consequence of that policy shock we talked about. Dr. Chen returned to China from a research position in California and was working out of a state-of-the-art agricultural research park in Henan province.
And what made this facility special?
Its funding model. It operates on stable, long-term, 20-year funding cycles, all dedicated purely to foundational research on climate-resilient crops and food security.
20-year cycles, that gives you the kind of stability you need for truly basic science. The kind of science that, ironically, the LSE study suggested was being lost because of the chilling effect in the U.S.
Precisely. And when the news of the Fusarium arrests and the media frenzy treating a common mold like agroterrorism, when that news reached them, the reaction wasn't confusion or fear. It was professional resolve.
What do you mean?
The political pressure just confirmed what they already strategically believed. China could no longer afford to view the West as a stable, reliable partner for essential scientific knowledge.
And that resolve translated directly into more resources.
Immediately, the political environment accelerated budget allocation to their department. Instead of relying on these now volatile U.S. partnerships or struggling with permits for genetic material, they just doubled down on domestic efforts.
So what did they focus on?
Their focus shifted intensely to building independent genetic libraries, collecting and sequencing crop genomes domestically, and creating what they called a fortress of knowledge. The political tension basically ensured their strategic move toward total domestic self-reliance in science was implemented faster and with a bigger budget than originally planned.
It's the ultimate paradox. A U.S. policy intended to restrict China's access to technology ended up validating and accelerating China's long-term plan to become fully independent in a critical sector. Now, we have to pivot back to how these narratives of espionage and agroterrorism were even built in the first place. The media played such a critical role in manufacturing the Fusarium panic.
The media coverage around these arrests it's a textbook example of how sensationalism and a lack of scientific context can actively manufacture widespread public panic. And that panic then feeds the political apparatus.
So what are the fundamental scientific best practices that were just thrown out the window in this coverage?
Quality science reporting requires rigorous context, measured language, and detailing the limitations of any finding. The Fusarium coverage violated all three of those rules. They repeatedly used terms like weaponized version and agroterrorism.
Which creates a false equivalence between just having a common mold and having a malicious geopolitical intent.
Exactly. And the core violation was the omission of key context.
Yeah.
That was absolutely central to the false narrative.
What context was missing?
Reporters just failed to mention that the fungus is endemic to U.S. fields, that U.S. labs studied the exact same samples under permit, that international scientific exchange protocols are totally routine.
And what about the health risk?
That was a huge part of the manipulation. An expert might correctly state that the fungus is harmful to humans and animals because of the Don mycotoxin. But the media failed to provide the necessary context about dosage or probability, or the fact that this is something farmers deal with every single year.
By leaving that out, they can prime the public for a spy thriller narrative that just isn't true.
They use the fear of contamination to do it. It's emotional manipulation.
And this manipulation relies so heavily on media framing, choosing certain parts of a story to promote a specific definition of the problem. We have research that shows exactly how this works, especially when anti-China sentiment is in the mix.
That's right. We can look at this really fascinating study that focused on Japanese online news during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while the context was different, the study demonstrated the precise mechanism by which media framing activates pre-existing negative stereotypes and escalates tension.
So what were the key dynamics they saw between the media coverage and public sentiment?
They saw two parallel trends. First, anti-China sentiment in online comment sections went up as COVID-19 infections in Japan went up. That's maybe not surprising. But in response to that rising national anxiety, the media landscape shifted.
How so?
They increased news items with what's called a negative valence, an overall negative tone toward China. And at the same time, they increased the number of articles related to politics and international relations.
So the media reflected the anxiety by giving people more negative and more politically charged content about the source of the anxiety. But the study found a difference between just being negative and the topic of the negativity, right?
That's the critical finding. The researchers analyzed it very carefully. They found that even when they controlled for the overall negative tone of the article, news that was specifically about politics or international relations induced a significantly higher level of anti-China sentiment in the comments than other topics, like economics or just general disease updates.
That is a profound distinction. Why would a political frame trigger a stronger negative reaction than, say, a health frame?
The thinking is that news topics about international relations or politics act as powerful triggers for deeply held, pre-existing negative stereotypes.
Stereotypes about foreign policy, military tension, alleged government malice, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those political themes activate those deep-seated prejudices far more powerfully than non-political subjects. So the agroterrorism framing of the Fusarium case, it's the perfect application of this mechanism. It mixes a health threat, the fungus, with a political agenda, espionage, and that activates the highest level security threat stereotype possible.
And the consequence is that this manufactured fear leaves the screen and enters the real world, and it damages the social contract you need for collaboration. The story about Farmer Mark really shows the cost of this weaponized ignorance.
It illustrates the perfect endpoint of this whole media cycle. You have Farmer Mark, who works his fields every day. He's watching this breathless news coverage about Chinese agents and bioweapons with all the dramatic, scary graphics.
And the report completely fails to mention that this so-called weapon, Fusarium greminarum, is a disease that is endemic to his own fields, one he fights every year.
Exactly. So his own expertise as a farmer is just overridden by the authority of the cable news network. He's been primed for suspicion. So the next day, when he sees a group of international students near a university test field,
students who are probably studying how to combat the very fungus he's worried about.
he doesn't see future scientific partners. He doesn't see students doing necessary research. He sees the terrorism graphic he saw on TV the night before. So he calls the sheriff.
The media's sensationalism weaponizes public ignorance.
It transforms potential collaborators into perceived threats and actively damages the essential social trust you need to tackle these shared global problems.
So let's bring this all together. The story of Fusarium greminarum is a perfect, tragic example of the politicization of scientific exchange. You have routine research material and bureaucratic errors being transformed into national security theater, all driven by ethnicity and a sensational media frame. It's a tragedy of misplaced focus.
And the damage is so much greater than just the initial arrest. The true damage is that chilling effect on collaboration, which we can now quantitatively measure. This pressure has led to a verifiable decline in the quality and the foundational nature of Chinese scientific output that relied on those U.S. links. And it's led to the loss of high-performing essential researchers from U.S. institutions.
And the paradox is that these political pressures, the very ones intended to slow scientific progress and protect American interests, have simultaneously accelerated China's long-term strategic plan to become fully self-sufficient in critical areas like agricultural R&D. It's shifting essential knowledge creation away from the U.S. sphere of influence entirely.
The ultimate national security threat here is not, and it never was, a common field fungus that already grows in every state. It is the deliberate destruction of the international scientific community and the intellectual bridges we need to solve far greater, truly global challenges like climate change, food insecurity, and future pandemics. That destruction is happening not through successful foreign espionage, but through manufactured fear, political paranoia, and the weaponization of bureaucratic regulations.